Welcome back to Quarks and Quarternotes. Today it is my pleasure to introduce our first ever guest, Joshua Huckabee. He is a biologist by education and an expert on wildlife. Today we'll be talking about biology and philosophy as it relates to wildlife. If you enjoy the show, you can support us by subscribing, liking, and leaving comments for us as feedback or questions. So Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
So I guess the first thing I'd like to do is, on our first episode, we talked about music and science, and we had a little section on biology. I'd love to get your thoughts and your take on some of the points we made there and what we may have gotten right, wrong, or what could be expanded on.
In regard to the first episode?
Yeah, regarding music and biology.
So maybe specifically, we're talking about music as an adaptation, or how did you pose it last time, John Henry?
There were a couple things. We talked about how it doesn't seem clear if animals ever do music just for enjoyment. It seems to be a communication mechanism. And then we also talked about whether it's an adaptive phenomenon to be able to enjoy or produce music. What were your thoughts on some of that?
Regarding that, I would have to agree with you that I can't think of really any animals that are simply doing music to enjoy music. I see some interesting things with parrots, as far as they at least appear to us to enjoy music, but I think that largely could be us just wanting to anthropomorphize them, project what we think, how we think they are feeling about it. But yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. I cannot think of any creature specifically that is, performing music solely for the sake of enjoyment.
Okay. And then what are your thoughts on adaptations? Because there's no theory of music as a biological phenomenon or anything like that. There's just hypotheses, and some people think that it has to be this highly adaptive trait that helped us survive, and some people think that that's not the case. What are your thoughts on that sort of thing?
I see it, as far as the way music has emerged with us. I can't say that I think it would be an evolutionary adaptation. I think it arose when we started having a lot more free time. My hypothesis is that music emerged as a spiritual component, or a component for reaching altered states of consciousness. I think you and I spoke on the phone, and I can't remember which you were arguing this would fall under which of your three categories?
Yeah, so we spoke on the phone beforehand, and we talked on some of this. And I had proposed 3 musical experience categories in our first podcast. Non-intrusive sort of background music, the enhancing category that enhances the activity you're doing, like exercise or dance. And then the indulgent category where you sit there and you focus purely on the music. You suggested a 4th category that you didn't think was encapsulated by those. Would you care to explain that?
Yeah, okay. So on your enhancing category, and I do think I possibly am splitting hairs with this one. Your argument that the spiritual aspect of it, such as a drum circle or singing in unison while a group of people are together trying to reach some heightened experience, be it spiritual or an altered state of consciousness, you propose that would be part of it, the enhancement. And I thought possibly that could be separated, and after thinking about it more, I'm not really sure.
What do you think, Tyler?
It's interesting to think about, because whenever you're thinking of doing the dance and the chant around the fire and getting in sync with the people around you and having this experience, a spiritual experience that Josh is pointing out, would you say that would be enhancing in the same way, the way you think of the category of enhancing? Do you think that fits under there?
I would. That's my first instinct for sure when I think of people doing sort of a religious ritual and taking part in the music. I'm thinking of the music as enhancing that sort of experience, maybe lifting it up into something spiritual, rather than it being the source of its own new sort of type of experience. But I can see the argument that perhaps there are types of experiences that are not just enhanced by music, but you simply cannot have them without music. And if you could substantiate that, I'd be very keen on making a fourth sort of category.
Well, I do know one thing, that pretty much every religion has music with it, right? I can't think of music or religion that's without it.
I can't think of any culture, even the most non-musical cultures, they like snap their fingers and move their bodies.
Have some sort of rhythm of something, right?
Yeah. So that's ubiquitous.
Even in the most primitive senses, going back to Buddhist monks for a few thousand years chanting the Om.
Yeah.
And using that for meditative purposes, or cultures down deep in the Amazon, far separated from other societies, in their ayahuasca ceremony, use the Icaros. And I think you may be right that it is an enhancement, at least on first instinct. I was thinking about it as that the music itself was a vehicle for achieving those, but I can also see yours as well. So maybe we're not gonna reach anything final on that.
Yeah, it's.
I might go ahead and defer to your enhancement, though.
No, it's completely valid, because once we're talking about the topic of human experience, there's no. We can't scientifically break down those and separate them. So we are just sort of talking about how we feel and what we think, and it's a tricky realm to explore in the first place.
Subjectivity, it often is.
Yeah, but what it comes down to is, if you do have an experience that you can only bring on from the music, then that's a valid musical experience. Did you have any additional thoughts about that first episode in particular related to the biology?
No, I enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, cool. I'm glad we do try to be intellectually rigorous on most of these things. Although I'll admit I didn't fact check some of the things, like the idea that birds don't sing to enjoy their own music. I never looked.
How would we ever know? Just see them doing it for no apparent reason or something like that?
That's a good question. Maybe if we saw one bird just like singing, and we saw like a bunch of other birds like flocked around him just listening. And then once he was done, they all left. That would be maybe some sort of indication.
That might help her, they started having music festivals and whatnot.
That would be a clear cut. So maybe it's not even a very useful thing to talk about in the first place. It's hard to measure that sort of thing.
That would be a fun experiment if you could set that up with some type of rigor and test that. Have a clear cut way that you could accept or reject your null hypothesis.
Well, just thinking about it, I was just starting to think like, well, I mean, the birds. What if the birds are looking at us and thinking some of the same sort of things? Like, do you think they even know what they're doing? We'd have no way of knowing the opposite, so that's funny.
I used to sing and play guitar for my Blue Crown Conure a lot, and she seemed to greatly enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. I have a Blue Crown Conure as well, and he loves blues, and he loves Queen especially.
That's interesting. My conure also enjoyed Queen. She was particularly fond of old school East Coast hip hop as well, like Run DMC and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen studies where they do test parrots' preference of music. I've seen parrots who love death metal and parrots who love classical music. But yeah, it's interesting. We converge a little bit on the Queen with the Blue Crown Conure. I've always found just like the very specific repetitive movements seem to please him. So like in another one bites the dust, you have the dun 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 dun. He loves that sort of thing. So any song that kind of follows that sort of vein, he absolutely loves it.
I would have to completely agree with you. Yeah, especially if there was a easily defined rhythm.
Yeah, and they'll like bob. He likes bobs his head to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to basically parody Run DMC songs and sing them to her.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay, well, let's talk about your work then. So, would you like to tell us a bit about Scale of Nature?
First, I'm constantly taking pictures and videos of various animals and plants as well. And I've always had a love for learning about them and then sharing what I've learned with other people. And it's almost compulsive for me if someone's around, if anyone's around if I see some cool insect or reptile, that I'm just going to start spouting off all my encyclopedic knowledge of them. So I've done this for years on Facebook, where I would share pictures and videos, and I was strongly encouraged to actually get a YouTube channel going on it. My original intention has been for a little bit longer form YouTube videos, but I've been trying to build somewhat of a base with very short things, because it's a little bit harder to get someone to engage in longer, more involved content without, at least I think, first catching their attention. So I've been doing a lot of shorter clips, and now I've got a couple of fairly short videos on YouTube. The name Scale of Nature I got from Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
He created one of the first taxonomic orders, if you want to call it that. It was called the Scale of Nature.
Mm-hmm.
That went from, I can't remember what was at the very bottom rung, but either way, through different classes of animals, and then his went all the way up to angels and higher beings such as that. But
at the bottom, I believe he had plants. Sorry, I didn't mean
I think you're right, because
they didn't know about bacteria at the time.
and I wanted to say bacteria, and I realized now they didn't know about that. I mentioned that in the name because, at least where I would like to go with this, I've been trying to combine my love of philosophy with my love of nature as well. And I'd like to, in future videos, start getting into talking about different philosophical subjects that I like, similar to what y'all have combined.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're in very good company.
No kidding, we talk about philosophy all day. So I do have one question on the scale of nature. So whenever I'm thinking about the scale of nature, I'm thinking of things like you have like the atomic scale, and then from there you kind of have like a full description of like chemistry, and then from that arises like a higher level biological understanding of the world, and then we can go to astronomical understanding of the world with the stars and stuff like that, and like a cosmological understanding. And each of these, they're in their own little like realm, but they're all different scales of nature. Is there anything similar to that, or you just like the name?
I do think that's really interesting, by the way, but really with the name, I was just trying to think of a creative way that I could somehow weave in both philosophy and nature. Translating that Scale of Nature into English sounded good.
Right, okay, I mean, fair enough.
And like you said, you're excellent at taxonomy, and just to clarify for those who aren't as familiar with the terms, taxonomy just is about classifying the different creatures.
Yes, exactly. Every living thing follows a biological taxonomic order. And the man who created our current taxonomic system, called binomial nomenclature, was Carolus Linnaeus, Swedish. And this was well back in the 1700s. As far as, I don't know if y'all ever learned the acronym Keep Pots Clean or Family Gets Sick, to represent kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species.
I'm sure Caitlin might have something like that, but
yeah, I never learned it myself. But when Caitlin was doing her classes, I remember, as for helping her study, I remember reading that, and she would spit those back at me. I never memorized them myself, though.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Linnaeus did that very breakdown for him, but Aristotle, he did, as far as you know, like the first sort of real attempt at something like that.
To categorize different species.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He was considered the father of both medicine.
Father philosophy, right? He's the first one to He looked at bugs, and he looked at plants, and he looked at people, and he was asking all the questions.
So at least got us moving on that.
Yeah, and someone has to ask the question first. On the note of philosophy, this episode, by the time people are watching this, it hasn't come out yet, but we talked about the history of ethics. And we talked about the Greeks, and we talked about the Stoics, and sort of the middle period with Thomas Aquinas, and then Kant, and existentialism, and things like that. Where would you say yourself, where do you fit in the philosophical sphere, if you had to pin it down?
Because I was forced to choose one.
Or one that's most representative of you, not necessarily. Everyone pulls and grabs from everywhere, of course.
Yeah. And it's your opinion that we're all existentialists, right?
Yeah. It's pretty close to it. I mean, you can't get around it, really, in my opinion.
But, and I would have to agree, but I would have to say, hands down, what is most practical and useful and what I employ daily is Stoicism.
Mm.
So I would definitely consider myself a Stoic.
So, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but I have some questions about Stoicism. We did talk about it, like John Henry said in the previous podcast. However, we didn't cover it we didn't go too much in depth, and I just wanted to just ask some questions on this. So how I understand Stoicism is, so the early Greeks, they understood man's psyche is split into three parts. You had the logos, and then you had part of your soul, which was the appetite, and then the other part of the soul, which was kind of your anger. So early on, the idea was that you wanted to balance your soul, that you wanted to have equal parts reason and logic, and then appetite and anger and all that, and you wanted to kind of balance all that. And how I understand it is that the Stoics, what they did is they changed their thinking to where we more need to use the logos part of the brain, the thinking part of the psyche, and kind of let that dominate over the appetite and over the anger and stuff of that sort. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the particular philosopher that this all spawned from, I'm not sure if y'all mentioned that. I hadn't caught that episode yet, but was Zeno of Cyprus.
Mm.
Right. No, we didn't say any names like that.
We just said Marcus Aurelius.
And he is by far my favorite, and I think he helped perfect Stoicism. But it started with Zeno of Cyprus, and he was a merchant that was shipwrecked in Athens, and I started reading Socrates, and where he, as you mentioned, some of those earlier ideas of how those should be balanced. But he found himself very unhappy. With this shipwreck, he basically lost everything, and he found that yes, those the anger and the appetites they could overcome the logos, which is
right, very easily.
Man being irrational, and he put his focus into overcoming the other two with the logos. And I think a really good way to briefly state Stoicism is we cannot control what is happening around us. We cannot control the events that happen to us, but we can control our internal environment. We can control how we react to something, how we feel about something, and our general opinions of what is happening to us.
Mm-hmm.
The major ones that we look at here is Epictetus, Seneca, which, oddly enough, he was a tutor to Nero.
Oops.
Well, yeah, I try not to hold that against him too much.
Yeah.
And, of course, Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that Aurelius really perfected a lot of these ideas and really showed them in practice with his life.
Yeah, I think everyone should read his meditations. They're absolutely brilliant.
Multiple times.
Yeah.
I try to read it. I try to go through it once a year.
It's a very short document, but it's filled with wisdom. I've toyed with Stoicism myself. I wouldn't consider myself a Stoic, but there's a whole lot of wisdom I pull from that all the time. And one question to you, just like a fun question. Would you say that a good Stoic would be like 80% logos and like 10% appetite, 10% anger, or like 100% logos, or somewhere else? What do you think?
So before you say that, I wanna point out in this framework of the psyche being split into these three parts, I don't think it's possible for one of the parts to completely wipe out the other two.
Course.
Although it can definitely dominate.
Of course, I'm talking about like ideally, not practically.
Okay.
Ideally, I think.
For you personally, like in a Stoic framework, do you think that the logos is the only thing that matters, or do you think the other two are somewhat important? And if so, how important would you rate them? It's kind of fun.
I guess ideally, I mean, you would shoot for 100% of the logos,
Okay.
and never. However, that's idealism is often not a great practice.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely need some of those appetites to physically drive you. Otherwise,
Be led astray.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you'll sit around and I am hungry and I'm starving to death, but I'm just gonna accept this, and you have none of your innate desires to go out
Okay.
and
Yeah.
let's call it a 60 on the logos.
Okay.
2020.
Okay. So it's important to consider the other things, but they should never take priority. That's where you would be.
Yeah, and ideally, I mean, terrible things are gonna happen. I think the best ideal is to always keep that mentality at the front of your mind. Oh, a great quote from Aurelius is, if it's endurable, endure it. Stop complaining. And I keep that particular quote at the front of my mind as much as possible, particularly when life is getting really hard. I say that quote to myself, and I try not to even complain to myself.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work that way, but I mean, at least you can use the ideal of perfection with that as a goal, which you're never going to reach it.
Yeah. To tie that in a bit with biology and nature, and I like to hear both your thoughts on this because it's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. So very recently, I've been reading a few books on biology to kind of sharpen my understanding of the natural world. So I've read 2 or 3 pretty important books for biology, and as I learn more, I continually am just struck at the absolute horrors within wildlife, from parasitic wasps that torture their prey, birds who smash the eggs of other bird mothers, ants who use pheromones to force the ants of other colonies to kill their own mothers. And I feel the more I encounter what most people would consider these evils, it's tough. And I like to hear both your thoughts on that, and then maybe ask a follow-up question.
So my personal philosophy and how I approach just life in general and the way I think about the world, that to me is, so the horrible things that you're describing with nature fighting each other, and so to me that's just like that's default. Like that's just normal. That's just default nature, and it does look horrible to us, as it should. But whenever we look back, just even like in humans specifically, we've done some pretty horrible things to each other and to other life forms around us. And so personally, yeah, like what I said, I think that's just the default position of nature, is to be in this constant battle of fighting each other and just suffering generally.
I guess the difference to me is, yeah, things used to be really bad for us and things were really bad in nature, but we're at the point where things aren't as bad for us, but nature's still completely abhorrent.
Right. Well, right. So day to day with electricity and all the things that we have available to us nowadays,
we have time to think about this stuff.
Right. For food, we have to go to Walmart or HEB. We don't have to go hunt. And that's quite a change to human lifestyle. But regardless, I think even so nature's like amoral, right? It does, no matter how good we're doing, like we still have hurricanes and earthquakes and all the sorts that are killing people and causing huge amounts of suffering. And yeah, so like I said, I think that's just the default way of being in this world.
What about you, Josh?
I'll have to completely agree with you. That is the default. And I have been asked the question quite often over the years, particularly, if it comes to like mosquitoes or something. These things are annoying and they cause me pain. What are they good for? Or the whole concept, I hear this constantly, of is that a good snake or a bad snake?
Snakes, just to quickly interject, snakes get such unfair treatment, and it frustrates me to no end how horrible people are to snakes.
I agree with you, and I feel the same way about wasps as well. There's in meme culture, there's all these wonderful things to say about honeybees, but wasps are just jerks or whatever.
They'll leave you alone. They'll totally leave you alone.
Yeah, I actually almost take personal offense to that because I love wasps, particularly the solitary wasp. I have tarantula hawks all over the place, and they have a horrifying life cycle. They're largest wasp in North America, or at least one of them. Probably one of the most painful things to be stung by in the world. And they paralyze tarantulas, put their eggs inside of them, and drag them in a hole.
Actually, kind of do have a problem with the ones who parasitize and torture their prey. So, what is your defense for them?
I think you're using the wrong word there, torture. Torture is implying, intentional malice.
Okay, so sorry, let me clarify. When I say torture, I mean causing unnecessary duress.
Well, it's not unnecessary, right?
Well,
it's raising its babies.
Well, they could once they have these things paralyzed, they could in many cases just do what they need to do. But a lot of times they don't. A lot of times they drag things on, which clearly seems like too excessive to me.
We're gonna go down a rabbit trail with this, but if that tarantula died prematurely, it would not stay viable inside for the larva of that wasp to develop in the timely fashion that they have to for their development. If that tarantula died immediately upon being stung, it would rot inside and the larvae would not develop properly. They need that host to stay alive so that those little babies can eat it from the inside out and develop properly. But
I'm definitely not trying to suggest the wasps themselves are like taking sadistic pleasure in doing this thing. They obviously have reasons, and they can only act upon those reasons. But man, it really sucks to be a spider.
Yeah.
It sucks to be a lot of things in nature.
Anyway, go back to the original point.
Sorry.
So I'm asked all the time, what are they good for? Why are these here? They're I find them uncomfortable or unpleasant. Nature is an arms race, a constant arms race of every creature is just trying to how it has adapted its ways to survive. And try to be careful not to anthropomorphize everything with this, but they're just doing what they do. It is what it is, and it is amoral. There is no seeking to necessarily harm one another, and you can't really take it personally. What these creatures do, and this sounds a bit cold, but I've often asked those when someone asks, well, what is that bug or what is that snake good for? Well, what are you good for? Because I really see it's just you're projecting your own personal feelings into some insect that has been around for 300 million years and been evolutionarily stable for that long. The bugs were here first. It's really their planet. Yeah, we're just passing through.
So I think it's a fair question. So I say, what is that parasitic wasp good for? And you say, well, what are you good for? I think that's a fair response. And my response would be, I'm good for having good experiences for myself and bringing good experiences to other conscious creatures, including insects and those around me. And I feel like I have a lot of utility in that. I feel like a lot of other human beings have a lot of usefulness in that regard. Now, the parasitic wasp, I would freely make a case that it is bringing about huge amounts of terrible experiences for other semi-conscious creatures like spiders. So that would be my response to something like that. And I realize the wasp isn't, it's a robot more or less. It's just acting on its instructions, but it is causing suffering.
A fellow I used to work in a lab with referred to ants as chitin robots, because chitin is what their skeletons are made of. So yeah, robots is a good way to look at it. Well, let's insert a little bit of subjectivity here. Let's say you're a tomato farmer and you have an outbreak of tomato hornworm moths, caterpillars in your crops. Well, subjectively, you would see those braconid wasps that are parasitizing those caterpillars, which would ravage your tomatoes or any other solanaceous plants that you have. Subjectively, you would see those wasps as being a great friend.
But only by virtue of justifying that I can use these tomatoes to generate a lot more positive outcomes for myself and other conscious creatures who can then bring more well-being towards other conscious creatures. I feel like I could make an argument and then justify the existence of some of these parasitic wasps, but I don't feel like that's the state for a lot of these wasps. A lot of these wasps are simply doing it for their own benefit. Obviously, they can only do it for their own benefit, but they're not indirectly giving us great things like tomatoes all the time, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, fair enough. Personally, I just like to not superimpose my ideals about what is good and bad onto nature as a whole.
Well, other humans are part of nature too, so what would you just distinguish moral agent or?
Yeah, I guess that is true. And I tend to also try to separate humans from nature, which is it's really
impossible.
Yeah, technically, but yeah, I guess I look at us as, yes, the moral conscious agents that have subdued nature.
Well, I have one question. So, of all these insects doing horrible things to their neighbors and these animals not torturing, but, causing bad things to happen to other species.
To other creatures, even sometimes within their species, but also other species.
Right. So, it seems like it would be easy for us to say that that's not a good thing or it's bad or something. But it seems to me that you can't really say that it's good or it's bad, right? It seems like it's just the default nature. To me, that would be like saying that the dust in the sky tends to coalesce and form stars, and those can form galaxies and stuff, and like trying to say that's good or bad, it doesn't make sense. It's just the way it is, right?
To use a more tenable analogy for me, you could say that certain sediment forming together into a boulder, that's not bad. But if the boulder falls off a cliff and smashes someone you like, that's bad.
Well, the thing is, so that would suck to me. I would hate for the person to...
And for the being...
Well, would they know?
They don't have to know, though, but they're no longer capable of experiencing anything good.
Right, so
I would call that bad.
Well, they can't experience bad either, is the thing. There's just no more experience there anymore. That seems pretty neutral to me. From the perspective of, like, the universe. Like,
it's neutral, but when you compare neutral to what good can be, neutral is bad. Does that make sense? That's my argument.
So do you think, like, we should try and... It'd be awfully hard to steer nature away from the default position of torturing your neighbors.
So this was my follow-up question. I was going to ask what you guys would think about eliminating wildlife altogether. So
I think that's a horrible idea.
Well, not so basically eliminating like wildlife as it is. We could create preserves and reserves where we stabilize the ecosystems in ways to where all the creatures can have more or less net positive lives, but we get rid of the state of wildlife because it is just a horror show. What do you guys think about that?
Are you personally going to appoint yourself as God over this world to decide what is acceptable to continue and what is not?
And how would you stop if just basic like evolution, right?
You don't have to stop it. You can just step in and control things when they start getting out of hand. Like you
Right.
said, you consider humanity like the morality of nature, right? So is it not our duty to try to do things like that and try to right the suffering that is being caused by unconscious creatures, unconscious agents?
No, I disagree. I'd say that it's not our duty.
That's fine.
Now, how do you feed yourself, John Henry? What do you subsist upon?
What do you mean?
What do you consume so that you can continue living?
I eat a whole lot of pea and rice protein, beans, whole grains. I consume meat once a week purely for things that are difficult to get in plants. I view it as like a supplement. So for the most part, though, I try to eat all plants.
It's largely the reproductive organs of living creatures. Sound like with all those beans and things like that.
Right, yeah. And my idea is I try to minimize the suffering caused in my diet. So the less that the thing I'm eating can experience, the better. I'd love to eventually move all my meat consumption to shellfish, since they have, as you would probably know, very limited capacity to experience anything.
Or at least our perceived capacity. I can't wait till the day that we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that plants are sentient with feelings. Just so I can smash the arguments of vegetarians and vegans.
No. This is the problem. So even if you prove to me that plants were more sentient and more capable of feeling than animals, if you could prove that to me, that wouldn't work, because the problem is the animals we consume more plants than we do. And by virtue of eating an animal, you are causing more plants to die. So by eating the plants directly, you actually cause less suffering and less harm. Or do you have a contention with that?
Yes, on that line of argument that if plants do experience suffering, just going straight to the animals eliminates.
The animals have to eat 9 times as much plants as we do to get equivalent.
Yeah, so cut out the middleman, so just eat cows.
But the cows have to eat the grass, which is suffering immensely. And the cows have to eat a lot more grass to survive than we do. Do you not get that?
Oh! You're saying that by farming them, that we're increasing.
When you eat a cow, that cow, to get to where it can be eaten, it has to consume significantly more plants than you would otherwise consume in its place. So to try to minimize suffering, we should just directly eat the plants, cut out the middleman, so that the cows don't have to eat all these plants that are suffering immensely.
Well, I hunt too, so you're speaking directly, as far as farming them goes. We have to grow more of these plants in order to feed these cows and whatnot.
Almost all the plants we farm now are fed to animals directly.
That is true.
So do you think it should be a goal of people to try and judge nature and then reduce the suffering that we see out there?
Yeah, that's what I think, but it sounds like Josh isn't quite there, but that's okay. I honestly, I was just kind of proud. I don't want to turn this into like some sort of debate or anything.
Well, to me personally, it just seems impossible. Like actually impossible.
Even when we're like a type 2 civilization with a Dyson sphere and...
I mean, maybe, but so that seems pretty impossible to me. Like sure, I could think about it. I can imagine the situation, but like it just seems in practice there's no way for us to do something of that.
No, I don't even know how we would do something like what I described with wildlife. I was just trying to get a gauge for what you guys thought, and if you had the option, would you do it? It's a thought experiment.
I would find it morally objectionable to do so.
I have no idea. We'd have to have some crazy control over nature in order to accomplish something like that.
I'm not probing the practicality of doing such a thing. I'm just probing how you guys think and feel, because these are the kinds of things that have been on my mind a lot.
I think about this quite often. I've run across people that are convinced that their dog needs to be vegan, or their cat or something like that, which I think is absolutely terrible. Yeah, I could even see, what are you going to do? Talk snakes into becoming vegan, or you give them a tofu house.
Tell the snakes to be easy on the mice next time it kills it.
To steelman the vegan position, I would say something like, no, the dogs and the cats and the snakes, they should eat what they are supposed to eat because their suffering matters too. The reason people don't need to, though, is because we've moved past what the dogs and snakes can do, and we actually have the option. We have the choice to where we can eat less meat and cause less suffering. The dogs and cats don't have that choice, and we're actually responsible for their well-being, and we should give them what they need, for sure. It's an interesting discussion. We should maybe move past it. And do you guys have anything additional you'd like to say about that?
I don't think suffering in nature is a problem per se. I think it's just like default. It's default. We can each do our best to reduce the suffering that creatures are experiencing, that beings are having. To get rid of it doesn't even make sense to me.
Do you have any final words on that discussion, Josh?
I'm going to side with Tyler on this one.
Okay.
I make various little interferences, such as I help turtles cross the road all the time, and particularly if some type of animal has made its way into some type of man-made problem, something stuck. I found a turtle stuck in a fence one time in like goat wire, and it couldn't even get its touch the ground. It just dug out everything around it. Yeah, of course I'm going to help that, but as far as, when I see a snake eating, a snake that I like, eating a lizard that I like, just sit back and,
yeah,
let them do their thing. That's what they do.
It's not a good or a bad thing happening. It's just nature doing its thing.
Yeah, it is.
Although it clearly sucks for the lizard. Quite clearly.
So to bring us back, the scale of nature, this is the page. I've watched a few. I haven't noticed too much philosophy, but I imagine it's because you're still doing the short form educational sort of thing.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm still working on the short form. I had shot a couple of 40-minute videos when I got this thing going, and just largely due to upload issues that I never got those out there because I live way out in the middle of nowhere and don't always have the best internet speed. But also just through watching, I've seen how people engage, and when I was trying to build an audience, I thought, okay, let's try to keep this down to 30 seconds, a few minutes.
You say you live out in the middle of nowhere. It seems you live next to a whole lot of animals. Maybe you're just much better at finding them than I am. In the last week, 9 different posts of these very unique creatures. Is it where you live, or are you just really good at finding stuff? Or
well, both. Anyone can train their eyes to be able to spot specific things. I know some people that will a specific car can drive by, and somebody tell me the make, model, all the details and stuff like that. My eyes can be trained to spot things moving, or creatures moving around. Now, I do live on a ranch, and my closest neighbor is a mile away, and that's pretty much my only neighbor. I spend pretty much every daylight hour I'm outside as a virtue of my job and just my hobbies. So, yes, being out in nature constantly, and there's really not too much of any type of any serious human developments out there. So, yeah, I tend to find a lot of things that way. But I could also probably, even go down to, like a green belt in Austin and be able to pick out quite a few things. It may just be because I've spent my entire life always looking for whatever living thing is around me.
I noticed there's also a little bit of humor. Is another thing, like the one with the badgers, and you're like, hey, badgers, I want to talk. And some of your other analogies I see you draw between the animal behavior and things we like. It can be pretty fun.
Well, I think I'm funny. And I like to joke around. I'm a pretty silly guy a lot of times. And I think humor is a really good way to engage people. So nothing on there is really all that scripted. I usually just kind of blurt out whatever, and I do silly things like that even if there wasn't a camera on me.
The goal is education, though?
Yeah. I for a very long time have enjoyed, and I did this in academia. I love teaching and engaging people and getting them interested in something that at least I find very fascinating. I've had that love of wanting to learn about things so much my whole nature and whatnot my whole life, and I just want to share that with others. So hence that's why the page really exists. Is I'd like for somebody to walk away, feeling like they've learned something new, and maybe also gaining a better respect for some of these animals. And a lot of my favorite creatures tend to be ones that other people are afraid of or hate. A lot of folks don't like spiders, and my profile picture is a big old tarantula hanging off of my hat. That tends to catch people's attention, and I just like to teach people not to be so afraid, maybe be a little bit more interested in the life going on around them, and maybe not stomp them just for
existing.
Just existing as a scary looking bug.
No, yeah,
Yes.
I'm really glad you're doing this because I've experienced this my whole life with just like spiders and wasps and snakes and almost all insects. They're so underappreciated and so underrespected, and people just kill them for nothing. They're just as worthy of attention as a dog or a butterfly or anything people don't seem to have problems with.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been successful over the years in teaching a handful of people that you don't need to kill these things. I don't know how many people have messaged me over the years just off of my personal Facebook and be like, because of you, I didn't kill this snake today, or because of you, I have a greater appreciation for possums and don't kill them when they're in my garden, or I didn't stop this spider. And every time I hear something like that, it feels like a win to me.
For sure. It's a win for the snake, and it's also a win for whatever might want to eat it for lunch. or like you don't want to disrupt the ecosystem. Some of those spiders, they'll eat pests that would otherwise annoy you. It comes, I think, just from, of course, our like primal instincts. We have very strong instincts that tell us to not trust things with certain types of bodies. It's very useful to overcome them. I think the stuff you do is really
any creature that doesn't have like a face or human resemblance. It's easy for us to attach zero emotion to that thing, right?
Or too much of the wrong kind of emotion. We just don't gauge it well.
I think a lot of people they'll look at other primates as close to us and project a lot of emotion as far as, well, they're just like us. And whereas, if a tarantula, and well, that thing has no feelings, it's nothing like me.
Right. 8 legs, completely different.
Other primates such as chimps, I think that us looking at them as, it has a face, it has emotions, that could lead to your death, in a very terrible one at that. Chimpanzees are incredibly dangerous animals. And I think that just because something has a face and it looks like us doesn't mean that you should approach it thinking that it's going to be just like you.
Right. So I'm thinking fish in particular right now. I've heard several times people ask me if fish can feel pain or if like have feelings or anything, and it's because they're just sitting there, right? And then they just open and close their mouths and they're just like looking around. They don't have any facial expressions or anything. And I think it's because of that people, they tend to think of them as more far removed from us than they actually are. They're still an animal that can still feel pain. And
I've heard the ridiculous statement before, like, "Oh yeah, I'm a vegetarian. I just eat fish."
Yeah. And it has its own name as well, pescatarians. I eat vegetables or plants and fish.
Right.
Because fish are plants.
The fish plant. Grow a nice harvest of salmon. It helps people be morally consistent, however they feel about things. I honestly don't care about how a lot of people disagree on certain things, but if you're at least consistent with how you treat. I've seen people who freak out at butterflies. I'm like, okay, well, at least they freak out at both the butterflies and the tarantula.
There is something to be said. There is something scarier about a tarantula
visually
than a butterfly,
I mean,
right?
They're about as likely to harm you in a lot of cases
Right.
for most types of tarantula. But obviously, there's some more aggressive
Exactly.
ones. But
Well, that seems to be the most, right? For the most part in nature, it seems like, in general, it seems like just animals will leave you alone.
I tend to not really be afraid of much of anything, especially when it comes to nature. But there are a lot of them out there that I greatly respect and
Right.
give them a lot of distance.
Right.
There's people every year that go into Yellowstone that see American bison as just being, big fluffy wild cows.
oh yeah, those are intimidating creatures. I would never downplay anyone who was scared of even a spider. Like, it's okay to be scared of a spider. It's normal, but it's your action that you do after that matters.
You don't have to kill the spider because you're scared of it.
I would say a large portion of what you'll see in the wild, just leave it alone. You don't even necessarily need to turn and go the other direction. Just go about your day. They're going about theirs.
I think insects are one of the most underrated. You did on your page and on your YouTube, you did a video on velvet mites not long ago. Do you think you could explain to me and for everybody, real quick, just what they do to attract their mates, the male velvet mites?
Oh, the love story of the velvet mites. Red velvet mites, by the way, those are arachnids.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's my mistake.
Get technical with it.
Arthropods, yeah.
We can say arthropods.
Thank
I love arthropods. It's a higher classification. A red velvet mite, they emerge after heavy rains, particularly out there in the desert. And when it's time to mate, they will construct what is known as a love garden. And this is actually a scientific term, love garden, in which they'll take sticks and little blades of grass and they'll spin silk around it and whatnot, and they will place a sperm packet, which is called a spermatophore, because many arthropods do not have internal intercourse like a lot of animals.
They're a little bit more like fish, where they'll just like kind of leave their stuff laying around.
Yeah, a little bit more strategic than just leaving it laying around, but so they'll place it in this little love garden, and then it'll make a silk trail for the female to stumble upon. And if she follows the silk trail, the male will be hanging around there and he'll do a little dance to try to impress her. And if she's satisfied with his digs and his dancing skills, then she'll go into the love garden and impregnate herself with the spermatophore. And there will be, 60 to 100,000 eggs come out of this.
Crazy. So,
But hang on.
well, I was gonna say if you want to learn more about that, you should go watch his full video. I don't want you to just like recap your whole video on here.
Oh, okay. Well, and go find out what happens, if another male finds that. That's where things get a little bit tricky.
Yeah. So the point, you should totally go watch that if you're interested in that. But one point I wanted to draw here is that this is a very intricate, interesting ritual. You can go look at pictures of these. They're quite interesting looking little structures they build with the silk and the sticks and stuff. And they leave their little trail. Imagine, if you will, what would it be like if someone found chimps building these little romantic gardens with trails of rose petals going up to it and doing this intricate ritual. People would go crazy about that. They would think that was amazing and insane, and yet it's happening in our backyards and no one cares.
Yeah, you just have to really look closely. My jeans are off, or clothes are always worn out just from crawling around, sitting there looking at stuff like that. There's so much going on that just often goes unnoticed. You might say, oh, wow, there's a red bug there. Well,
Yeah, all right.
that's the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking on bugs, what would you say your favorite insect order is? And for people who aren't as familiar with the taxonomy, order is a classification where you get things like you have beetles and you have mantises and that sort of level of distinction.
Well, I will say my research used to be in Odonata. I do which are dragonflies and damselflies.
Ooh.
But I think my probably my favorite order would be Coleoptera, which is beetles. It's the largest order of all insects. There's like 1 million described species of beetles.
Oh my gosh.
That's
beetles?
Described species.
That's crazy.
And you could go down into the various rainforests around the world and find new species every day. I mean, just even trying to find out what that one species is, to see if anyone else has described it, is can be a task in itself. So they're really cool. They have a lot of cool adaptations.
Yeah, that's a popular answer I found. That's Caitlin, my wife. That's her favorite. She's in Coleopteran gang.
I'm trying to remember who. It was I want to say a philosopher, and maybe a philosopher who was also a biologist, I think. Someone asked him about the nature of God. And the answer was, I don't know, but he has an inordinate fondness for beetles.
I've heard that, actually. I do enjoy that quote. That's a funny one.
Do you have any like questions or points, Tyler, you'd like to?
No, most of the questions I had was on the Stoic philosophy lifestyle and kind of how you approach just your day-to-day.
I would like to add on, we kind of got a little bit more into, I guess, technical side of Stoicism, but it's very easy to approach. That I just try to wake up every day feeling grateful, knowing that not even this whole day is promised.
Right.
We only have this moment right now, and
two things are certain: death and taxes. Right.
Exactly. And I always try to be grateful for what I have, because I've definitely seen things in my life be worse, and life can always get very. Try to be grateful, do the best I can in every moment, know things that life will be hard, and see those challenges as something to help me grow, and just always try to be good to everyone and everything around me.
Yeah. So. Very wise outlook. You got principles of Buddhism, you got existentialism in there, and a nice, responsible Stoic philosophy. It's very nice.
And check out Daily Stoic, which is on Facebook and Instagram, and there's a website. It's put together by a guy named Ryan Holiday, and he posts little quotes daily from different Stoic philosophers. And I think they're wonderful motivation to particularly look at it in the morning to approach your day.
Well, is there anything else you would like to talk about, Josh?
I would like to ask, our listeners to check out Scale of Nature on Instagram or Facebook and YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe.
All that good stuff, yep.
Yeah. And I just also want to thank you for having me on here. I love what y'all are doing, and this is a blast. First time I've been a guest on a podcast.
Yeah.
It's fun for us too. First guest we've had.
Yeah, nice to have someone else in here. A lot of fun. Appreciate you coming on. I love talking biology. I love biology.
Right. I love it too because I don't know hardly anything in the biology field. Very, very surface level knowledge, but not much above it. So it's very interesting talking about it because it's just like, the whole time I'm just like, wow, I don't know any of this. This is crazy.
Okay, well, that'll be it. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to go check out Josh's stuff, especially if you want to learn more about the wildlife around us.
That's the Scale of Nature, right?
Yeah, Scale of Nature on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. We'll leave links to all that stuff. And yeah, be sure to check it out, and feel free to leave questions. Love to hear what you guys think about the various topics we hit. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
All right. See you guys later.
Awesome.